At 0223 hours, 3 Ukrainian FP-1 drones crossed into Russian-monitored waters at 180 kilometers per hour, heading for a Russian ship that had been strangling Ukraine's naval drone operations. The Russian spy ship sat 15 miles off of Novorossiysk. Its 381 trillion rands arrays listening. For 6 weeks, it logged a pattern of life and was days away from predicting strikes. While the patrol had been relatively quiet so far, this would all change in a matter of seconds. Unknown to the Russian spy ship, the Ukrainian drones skimmed 3 meters above the waves, heading straight their way. Their plywood construction gave them a radar cross-section smaller than a seagull, essentially invisible to systems designed to track aluminum aircraft. 20 minutes after launch, a Russian Forpost-R reconnaissance drone appeared on the horizon, patrolling in its standard racetrack pattern 30 kilometers off the Ukrainian coast. The Forpost Canadian-made MX-15 DI camera could spot a basketball at 5 kilometers away. Its thermal mode detected temperature differences of just 2 degrees Celsius. At 0245, the lead FP-1's engine heat spiked on the 4-post display. 3 small contacts low altitude heading east at 180 kilometers per hour. The Russian operators zoomed in trying to classify the targets. The pre-programmed evasion kicked in immediately. The drones dropped to 2 meters above the water, disappearing into what radar operators call ground clutter. The chaotic returns from waves that mask low-flying objects. But here's why wood matters. Within minutes, the plywood frames had cooled to match the sea temperature. To the 4-post thermal camera, they'd vanished. The operator logged the contact as possible birds and continued his patrol, not knowing he'd just let through the vanguard of an attack. Behind the drones, the reason for their rushed launch became clear. Russian Shahed had found their launch site, arriving just minutes after the FP-1S cleared the area. The operators barely escaped, as 50 kilograms warheads turned their equipment into scrap metal. The spy ship's intelligent network was already working, but not fast enough to stop what was coming next at 0330 hours. As the FP-1S were crossing the Black Sea, 20 Ukrainian naval drones launched towards Sevastopol at 80 km/h. What happened next would trick Russia into leaving their most valuable intelligence asset completely defenseless. The decoy swarm was a mix of modified jet skis and cheap commercial boats fitted with basic guidance. Each cost less than $10,000. Throwaway assets designed to look exactly like Mira V5 naval drones on radar. They maintained formation, transmitted the right radio signatures, and moved at attack speed to Russian radar operators watching their screens. This looked like the largest naval drone assault since October 2022. Creating a convincing decoy swarm requires more than just sending boats toward a target. The drones had to follow for realistic attack patterns, spreading into assault formations, converging on likely targets, even performing evasive maneuvers. Ukrainian operators controlled them via satellite link for the first 50 kilometers, then switched them to autopilot. Each drone broadcast on frequencies known to be monitored by Russian intelligence. Some even carried heat sources to mimic the infrared signature of armed drones. The deception had to be perfect. The Russian admiral had 6 Ka-27PL helicopters at Novorossiysk, 4 at Sevastopol. These helicopters were the Black Sea's fleet primary defense against naval drones. Ships are too slow to chase them. Fighter jets can't hover to search, but helicopters can cover 100 kilometers in 20 minutes, drop RGB-16 depth charges that neutralize everything within 50 meters and use their dipping sonar to hunt underwater drones. Without them, Novorossiysk approaches were defenseless. Russian doctrine demanded responding to the visible threat first. All 6 Novorossiysk helicopters launched west at 270 km/h. The distinctive womp-womp of their rotors faded as they raced toward the decoys. Every minute they flew west was another minute the real drones flew east unopposed. By the time they realized the deception, they'd be 360 kilometers out of position. The spy ship 15 miles off of Novorossiysk now had no air cover, no quick reaction force, no way to vector helicopters to investigate contacts. For the next 2 hours, any drone that got past the patrol boats would have a clear shot. The 3 FP-1S adjusted course 15° north. This wasn't random. It exploited something the Ukrainians had discovered through months of observation. The Russians had 2 Podlet K-1 radar stations covering this sector. Each radar rotated at exactly 10 revolutions per minute. Picture 2 searchlights, spinning in circles for 4 seconds every minute. They're both pointing away from the same dark corner. That corner was a 2 kilometers corridor the drones had to hit precisely. But the Russians had adapted. Random desynchronization eliminated predictable blind spots. The corridor was shrinking. The first drone entered at 0447, 4 seconds invisible, 2 seconds visible as one radar swept past, then invisible again. The radar operator saw a brief contact, something small moving fast. The second drone followed 30 seconds behind, still on course, still invisible with full fuel tanks. But the third had developed a problem. A microscopic flaw in its autopilot gyroscope caused it to drift right 200 meters off course and growing. At 0448, Russian operators received their orders, randomized rotation patterns. The third drone corrected hard north, burning precious fuel. It entered the collapsing corridor at 0449. Both radars painted it clearly: contact bearing 270, speed 180, altitude 50 meters. The operator reported 20 confirmed targets at Sevastopol versus 1 questionable blip. The operator marked it probable. Bird and returned to tracking the decoy attack. The third drone had made it through, but that maneuver burned 12 minutes of fuel. It would reach the target area with less than 60 seconds remaining. Meanwhile, the Russian spy ship maintained station 15 miles off of Novorossiysk. Despite the decoy attack, its mission took priority. But the ship wasn't alone. 2 Project Zero 3,160 patrol boats maintained a protective screen circling at 5 kilometers radius around it. Standard doctrine since losing the Mosba, the spy ship's radar could see threats the patrol boats couldn't, vectoring them like a quarterback calling plays. At 0500, the decoy fleet performed its final act. As the Russian helicopters closed to engagement range, the 20 drones scattered in different directions. Some beached themselves on empty coastline. Others circled in place until their fuel ran out. A few simply stopped moving. None attempted to reach actual targets. Their job was already done. The helicopters spent another hour hunting stragglers, burning fuel, wasting ammunition on drones that cost less than a single depth charge. By the time they headed home, they were 180 kilometers from Novorossiysk, and half their fuel was gone. The real attack was still coming, but visibility continued dropping as morning fog thickened. At 0600 hours, the lead FP-1 was now 240 kilometers from the target when its GPS position began sliding east. The drone wasn't turning. Reality was being rewritten. The Russians had activated their R-330 Zhitel system from Crimea. This wasn't crew jamming. The whispered lies broadcasting fake GPS signals at 100 watts versus real satellites at 0.00001 watts. The Russians had perfected this trick and started walking drones toward the ground. Now they're walking the FP-1 toward a Panzer battery. But here's the thing. Ukrainian operators had learned too. Every 50 kilometers, oil platforms dotted the Black Sea. The FP-1's primitive cameras could spot these from 5 kilometers away. Resetting position based on preloaded coordinates. No amount of spoofing can beat the old reliable Mark 1 Mod 1 eyeball. The second drone, however, never made it to the next platform. At 0615, its GPS receiver died, not from jamming, but from a junky Chinese capacitor that couldn't handle temperature cycling. Without GPS, it switched to inertial navigation. But INS over water accumulates 10 meters of error per minute. 8 kilometers off course meant it was heading for empty ocean, not the target area. At 0645, it hit the water. No explosion, just gone. 2 drones left. The third one, 5 kilometers behind, still had clean GPS, but not for long. The Russian ship went active. Its mineral Me radar began painting the western approaches. The ship's signals intelligence team was also working. Every electronic device creates harmonics, ghost frequencies. When circuits resonate, this is what they would exploit. At 0723, they found one bearing 180 kilometers per hour, 15 kilometers out. The ship's radar locked on. The lead drone's primitive threat receiver registered the lock, but would confuse his radar designed for metal. The Mineral M's algorithms look for sharp returns from aluminum. Wood gives mushy, inconsistent returns. The radar kept losing lock. The operator reported intermittent contact, possibly birds. The third FP-1 made a decision. Its simple programming allowed detecting radar ahead. It shut down everything except mechanical gyroscope, flying blind on compass, heading alone. But running this electronic warfare system caused another problem. Its R-984 jammers protecting against naval drones were creating electromagnetic noise across multiple bands. The jammers operated at 20 to 1,000 megahertz. right in the middle of the ship's communication frequencies every time they transmitted. They degraded their own radar returns. Russian doctrine called this electromagnetic fratricide. Your own systems interfering with each other, a calculated risk, the manual said, and they were about to learn the true cost. At 0725, the ship vetoed a patrol boat to investigate the intermittent contacts. The boat accelerated to 35 knots, crew manning the forward PKM machine gun. The gunner loaded a fresh 200-round belt, checked the iron sights, and braced against the mount. His loader stood ready with 2 more belts. They drilled this hundreds of times, engaged low-flying targets at 500 meters, walked tracers into the target, maintain fire until splash, standard procedure, investigate, identify, engage if hostile. But they were briefed for aluminum drones with infrared signatures. Nobody mentioned plywood ghosts. The lead drone had 3 minutes of fuel. Behind it, the third drone flew on, invisible but blind. The morning fog was now thick enough to cut visibility down to 500 meters. At 7:30, the lead FP-1 reached the target area 15 miles off of Novorossiysk. The Russian spy ship sat exactly where predicted, still vectoring patrol boats toward the incoming threat. The spy ship had created a radar fence, 2 patrol boats with overlapping positive Me-1 coverage. Each radar covered 120 degree, detecting 0.1 square meter targets at 15 kilometers. Classic Soviet doctrine assumed one thing. Physics would cooperate, but the Black Sea had other plans. A temperature inversion was forming, warm air over cold water, bending radar beams upward like light through a prism. This wasn't unusual for the Black Sea in September. The water stays warm while morning air cools rapidly. The density difference creates an atmospheric lens. Radar operators train for this, but the correction formulas assume standard conditions. This morning's inversion was severe, a 10-degree temperature differential in just 50 meters altitude. The radar beams bent upward at a 15-degree angle. What looked like 50 meters on the screen was actually 80 meters in reality. Anything below 30 meters was completely invisible. The FP-1 at 3 meters might as well have been a submarine. The lead drone approached at 0732. The Russians were scanning 50 meters altitude. Their beams were actually looking at 80 meters, so the drone slipped underneath. The patrol boat spotted it visually at 500 meters. The lead drone's camera showed the patrol boat growing larger, 500 meters, muzzle, flash, 400 meters. The PKM's distinctive chatter echoed across the water. Tracers walking across the surface. 3 rounds hit, clean holes through wood. 1 clipped the propeller. The engine began vibrating violently but kept running. The drone cleared the boat's range, 90 seconds of fuel remaining. At 0733, the spy ship's distinctive mast was visible 800 meters away, but the damaged propeller had cracked the engine mount. The patrol boat radioed. Drone inbound, bearing 285, damaged but still flying. The bridge crew grabbed binoculars, scanning south where the boat pointed. They should have looked northwest. The third FP-1 had been lucky, flying on mechanical gyroscope alone. It maintained course. It had emerged from morning haze at 0734, approaching from the port bow at 180 kilometers per hour, now 10 meters above the water. The lead drone's engine finally seized at 0734, beginning its final glide. The lead drone had done its job. Every Russian eye was tracking it plunge into the water, while the real threat approached unseen. The ship's navigation radar couldn't depress below -5 degrees. The designers never imagined something would attack from below this angle. The patrol boats were out of position. The bridge crew was scanning the wrong sector. But just like the Ukrainians relied on visual fixes, so did the Russians. A Russian lookout spotted the third drone at 300 meters. Too late. The drone's camera centered on the bridge roof, where the mast housed all 3 special antennas, the 25 kilograms, smashed into the mast base. The explosion gutted the bridge instantly. The R381T arrays that could hear a radio in Romania melted. The computers with 6 weeks of patterned slag, the mineral mere twisted metal. Secondary explosions cascaded through the power supplies. When the fires finally died 18 hours later, the ship's electronic radar suite looked more like a Salvador Dali painting. 6 weeks of intelligence gathering, dozens of recorded launches, the patterns that would have ended Ukraine's drone war, all gone. The ship would sail again, but its electronic eyes and ears were permanently blind. Within hours, Ukrainian drones were launching from new sites with new patterns invisible once again. The Russians could still hit launch sites, but now they were hitting empty fields. The patterns were gone. Bye for now. If you like this video, please share it, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget, to leave your feedback in the comments.